Hey everyone, Sayre at Nova Motorcycles again. And this week we are talking about a 1964 Norton Atlas 750cc parallel twin. Um, this bike in particular is an interesting example of another custom bike, believe it or not. This is not how this bike is coming from coming from the factory. Um, so if you watch our videos, you notice we've talked about a few different kinds of customs. We build customs ourselves here. And we've gotten into the concept of what is a custom bike and what makes something, worthy of being called a bike build or something like that rather than a restoration. This bike in particular is kind of cool because this is the guy who owns it now. He bought it new in 1964. And he rode it for a while and then had a period of not riding it. And he got to a point in his life where he said, you know what, I want this bike back. But he wanted it back differently. And he wanted it back in a way he'd always kind of liked motorcycles to look. So he did all this stuff himself. He had all his paint done and rebuilt the motor, went through the motor anyway, did a lot of stuff to it. And it's pretty clean and pretty tidy. If you look closely at it, there's not many drops of oil, which is pretty impressive for a Brit bike. And the paintwork is pretty fastidious. The cleaning on it is meticulous. It's kind of an interesting looking bike. We've had this bike in here a couple times over the past few years for various things. Helped him get it some of the tuning sorted out, and now it's in here for a clutch replacement, which was done. And also realized when he went to start it, realized he had some Mag-Dyno work that needed to happen before the bike would run. So this is actually the good one, but the other one of these brushes for the high tension lead on the Mag-Dyno completely disintegrated, which is kind of something that happens with old machines sometimes. But anyway, we've seen the bike before, and this bike gets a lot of comments from people. There's something very classic about the style he chose for it. In my mind, it's very American, which is probably the reason it's not my cup of tea when it comes to how you would modify a Brit bike. If you've seen my bikes, I'm like minimalist, alloy tank, take off everything you can, and don't add anything that's decorative whatsoever. This is sort of the opposite. A lot of decoration going on, more like an American bike, more like a 30s Indian or Harley or American cruiser. The fenders are large, and more so they're painted, elaborately. The wheels are painted, the hubs are painted. That's not a normal thing for a bike like this. You've got these fishtail pipes on it, which is a very American thing. You see that on American cruisers. And these big wide bars, although the bars may be stock. This era of British bike was when the Brits realized they had to sell to Americans to keep up, and so they started doing things to make them more Harley-esque in general anyway. But what he's done is he's taken it and he's in my mind further Americanized it. The seat, this is not a standard Norton seat, snake skin or crocodile skin, whatever this could be. But it's got a look to it, and people comment on this bike every time it's in here. There's something about it that looks like something old should look, and I think that's cool. It's not a bike that I would choose to paint like this, but that doesn't matter because it's not my bike. I like the owner's enthusiasm for it. I like his love for it. I like the fact that he committed to bringing his original bike back so he can ride it again. And honestly, when I get on it, it's super fun to ride. He's done a lot of things really right on it, and I've only adjusted a few things to make everything work a little bit better. About the Atlas, this is the beginning of the last gasp. This was just before the Norton came out with the Norton Commando in 68, 69. This motor is what a Norton Commando motor. This is the basis of a Norton Commando motor. It is a parallel twin 750cc. Shares most of the things with a Commando, except if you ever notice a Norton Commando, they took it and they canted it forward about 15 degrees. And the Commando, as is known, was rubber mounted to deal with the vibrations. And the rubber mounting of the Commando allowed them to put the engine into a higher state of tune without breaking things on the frame through vibration and stuff. So the Commando puts out more horsepower. It's a more zippy and peppy bike to ride. This is no slouch. It's 750 twin, long stroke motor. Has a lot of torque, but if it starts to rev too much, you get those vibrations coming through your hands. So they were kind of, for their time, it was definitely clear the writing was on the wall for this sort of design without a major change like the Commando, like the isolastics in the Commandos, or what the Japanese did, which was make well-balanced four-cylinder motors that didn't vibrate at all. You didn't have to worry about it. Anyway, in the early 60s when these came out, they were still fairly good, and one of the fastest bikes you could get. You could cafe these and make them into hot rods on the street. The frame on this bike is the world-famous Norton featherbed frame. That was a huge revolution in frame design in about 1952, 51. So even by now, by 64, it was getting stretched, but it had a lot of fame. It was originally designed as a racing frame for the Norton Manxes, and compared to what came before it, it was a huge leap forward. A well-supported steering stem, well-supported swing arm area, and enough thick tubing and stuff that the frame actually held itself triangulated to a certain degree, and was much stiffer than what had come before it, and handled higher speeds and more forces going through it. So these are still sought after as a classic frame, classic racing frame, or in the cafe racer custom building culture. You know, any kind of featherbed frame, something is pretty special. The Triton is a famous custom from the era, 50s and 60s, but that is a Triumph motor wedged into a Norton frame, because the Triumph supposedly was a faster motor, but the Norton was a better handling frame. I'm going to go ahead and say I agree that Norton was a better handling frame. I don't think the Triumph was a faster motor. They were cheaper, and there was more of them around. But anyway, so the Atlas is definitely a period piece from the 60s. It represents a certain era where designs had stretched to a certain point, and they were really reaching their limits, but were still a ton of fun. 64, this thing was a king of the road. There wasn't much else that could beat it. By 66, 67, it was clearly long in the tooth, and by the time the Commando came out, this was a relic. So this is nearing the end of its era, but pretty cool and pretty fun to ride. Side note: the designer of the Norton motor, this motor originally started out as a 500cc motor, the Norton Dominator, and it was stretched from a 500 to a 600 to a 650 to a 750. The man who designed it was Mr. Bert Hopwood. He also designed the unit construction BSAs, A50 and A65. There's a bunch of other things. So I try to mention him as whenever I can. I've named my dog after him, our cute shop dog who is whining in the background somewhere over here, Herbert. But yeah, a pivotal motor, and share some designs with the BSA A65, such as internal push rods. You've heard me go off perhaps about how I don't like Triumph push rod tunnels. So yeah, anyway, side note there. So yeah, let us know if you have any experience with these things, or if you even, the Dominator, the 500s, the 600s, super cool bikes, featherbed frames, all this stuff. If you're into Americana and have thoughts about how the Brits did stuff like this, or people have done stuff like this, and if you're into Indians and Harleys and think this is a travesty, let us know. If you think it's cool, let us know. As usual, thanks for watching, and if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel and like the videos.